Hi, I'm Vanessa K. Eccles, author and host of the Fable podcast. I wanted to hop on today before we move on to another topic next week and talk a little bit more about Mary Shelley. She is probably one of my favorite, possibly the favorite literary history figure. And I was so excited to get to do this episode, and I've had a lot of people talk to me and mention how much they enjoyed it, and I'm really glad for that because her story, though it's tragic, I feel like it's really important to be remembered. And so I wanted to mention a few things that you may not know about Mary Shelley. I thought these were really interesting, and I hope you will too. Mary Shelley was named after her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was an admired advocate for women's rights, and she's best known for her work, A Vindication for the Rights of Women. Mary Wollstonecraft died only 11 days after giving birth to Mary Shelley. This is a sad part of her life, I'm sure, growing up without a mother, and also knowing that her giving birth to you actually contributed and ended up and resulted in her death. And Mary Wollstonecraft died from an infection, and this was really common in the day. As we know, women dying in childbirth was one of the highest killers of young women. So of course this was never Mary Shelley's fault of being born and that causing her mother's death, but I'm sure that was a traumatic and somewhat haunting thing to walk through life knowing that. Frankenstein was written by a teenager. I mean, can you just imagine being 18 years old and writing a classic piece of literature? Yeah, well, that's exactly what Mary Shelley did. At 18 years old, she and her beau, Percy Shelley, went to spend a summer in Switzerland, really famous summer, and that is where she began working on Frankenstein. She's said to have had a dream, and that's what kind of birthed Frankenstein, but that summer was very haunting. It was unseasonably cold, and it was gray because the year before there had been a huge volcano that had ash that had covered the sky. So it was known as the year without summer. And that summer not only was the infamous Frankenstein born, but so was the vampire as we know it, written by John Polidori, and that was actually inspiration for Bram Stoker's The Dracula. Another thing that I think is kind of funny is that pop culture will have you believe that Frankenstein is the monster, when in fact Frankenstein is actually the scientist. I'm not sure how we got that twisted in society, but then again, maybe it wasn't an accident, because if you kind of think about it, it could be, depending on your interpretation, that the monster was merely a extension of its creator. And if that's the case, then maybe that is appropriate. When Mary Shelley first published Frankenstein, she published it anonymously. She dedicated it to her father, and Percy actually wrote a preface for it, but she published it anonymously, which led a lot of people to believe that Percy Shelley had actually written this. Percy was already a well-known name in the literary world, and so was her father, Godwin. And so these things kind of attributed to that, and not to mention that many people didn't believe that a woman could come up with such a dark monster. There has been talk, and historians sometimes believe that her publishing it anonymously could have been because she feared possibly losing custody of her children, which is very, very sad and hard to imagine. She did later republish it under her own name. But even then, people had a hard time reconciling such a dark, horrific story with a young woman. So a lot of people still believed Percy had wrote it. Another interesting fact is that Frankenstein was considered the first science fiction novel, which is a huge feat and attribute to her and her amazing mind. I think that her birth of this and the monsters and her contribution to Gothic literature and into Romanticism as a whole speaks volume of her intelligence and just the way her mind thought. She had a tragic life, as you know if you've listened to the episode, which all of this could have contributed to her thinking and nightmares and her monsters. Upon her death, her son, Percy Florence, found that she had kept Percy Shelley's heart with her all this time in her desk with papers. Percy had been cremated, but Mary had kept his heart, and she had wrapped it in a poem of his, which is really poetic for sure. That's definitely a romantic move there. The heart has now been placed with the family. But another interesting part was that she had in her desk as well these little pieces of hair from each of her dead children. I think death really haunted Mary, and we see that a lot in her work. And obviously it's something that she kept with her, not only in her memory, and she didn't just, write it in literature, but she also kept it literally right there with her. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that you will like and subscribe. If you'd like to hear more about Mary, I really hope that you'll listen to the episode because it goes into greater detail about her life and some of the history behind Frankenstein and some of the inspiration as well. I will link that below. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.